So if you thought AI couldn't become even more active than it was, imagine the kind of dialogues people like me and others in this industry that are trying to help people navigate this world are having right now. So joining me today on AI Insights with John Roese and Maribel Lopez, a friend from the analyst community. We've had lots of interaction, and I thought it would be fun to talk about not big picture long term things, but what's the dialogues right now? What are the in the last couple of weeks? What have we all been talking about? Because every week it's a new adventure, and the last couple of weeks has been no different. So Maribel, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, it's actually great to be on your podcast. You're on my podcast recently. So here we go. It's that circular thing.
Yeah.
What's going on? Okay, so I think as you mentioned, we go through these peaks where sometimes we're just talking about technology, sometimes we're talking about the big acquisitions and investments. For me, the past couple of weeks have been the reality around AI and the reality that enterprise buyers are experiencing around AI. Every organization has a mandate to do AI. A lot of it's a board level mandate without a lot of structure around it, should we say. And the thing that I've been hearing the past couple of weeks is the pushback around all the studies are seeing and hearing around, 95% of generative AI use cases never make it to production. 75% of them are failing. So there's all these big numbers about the failure of AI. And many have experienced that, and many are trying to deal with their management to get investments for AI and to try to move out of POCs and into something that's real and actually delivers new value, right? So I think you and I have talked extensively in the past about new value. So that seems to be the dialogue that we're dealing with now.
Yeah, I think it is. If you remove the word AI, and I said, hey, there's this technology you should be interested in, except in the press, 95% of the time you're going to fail, or 75% it's total BS. That would not be an exciting thing to go pursue. But in this case, because it's AI, we've all kind of been told we have to go pursue this. And the reality of it is that that's correct. We do. If done properly, AI, when done correctly, when focused on the right process, when executed with precision, when done on the right data, does actually result in significant business impact. But we still have this kind of disconnect between the hard path to get to production versus the casual approach to it. And I think, a lot of these articles have just called out that, it's nobody's fault early, and there's a lot of kind of casual, maybe, abstract ways people are trying to navigate this. But for those of us who are actually doing it, the reality is it's hard. It deals with the entire stack, deals with your data. You have to be very disciplined about the technology. You have to make a bunch of decisions. You have to make a bunch of non-decisions that you have to reject. And so I think that's the noise that's coming out of this. But I'd be curious, how that, when you have those discussions and you try to, engage, what does that dialogue go? How does that go?
Sure. So, we already started with the doom and gloom, right? We've got all the bad numbers. So the question is, we have bad numbers on one side, but then we have numbers that say there's been an eightfold increase in AI spending over the past 3 years, right? So how do you reconcile those two viewpoints? So you have to ask yourself what's going wrong and why. And the what's going wrong and why are the things that you just brought up. They're very prevalent, persistent problems, but we still need to get over that hump. So we become very enamored with the tools versus the use case. So I'm building an AI platform. We saw this happen in mobile. We saw it happen in IoT. It's like, well, do you need a hammer? Do you need a screwdriver? Do you need an impact driver? Until you know what you're trying to do, you can't select the right tools. So that's job one, is trying to figure out the use cases that are going to deliver ROI for the company. The use cases are best if they can be tied to a key KPI for the organization, because then you can demonstrate value, you can get funding for them. Those should be obvious, but we didn't start there. We started more with like the AI as a science project, right? Then observability. You don't have any metrics, you don't have any way to observe it. If without any metrics, you can't say if you're winning or losing. Without any observability, you can't say if it's working or not. Prevalent problem we've had. John, you and I have talked about data for how long now? Bad data equals bad AI. Nothing has changed there. And even with all the amazing tools that we've been talking about, companies like yours are actually focused on the data, but a lot of the AI companies are not focused on the data. They're just assuming that your data's ready. So if you're not bringing high quality available data to the party, it's a problem, right? So that's probably the biggest issue after trying to figure out what you're trying to do that we see. But there's also a governance gap, right? So how do we secure, how do we govern? Exactly what we talked about before, but we found that, roughly only half of the companies we spoke with actually were taking care of that specific item at the outset. And that just means you're set up for failure, and it's a risky proposition. So you have to be very careful with what you're doing with your data when you don't have a governance and risk stack. So that's how some of these discussions are going. But now that we've gone through the doom and gloom and everything that's wrong, I probably should give a little light at the end of the tunnel and
Yeah.
say that there really are organizations that have selected use cases. Um, they've scoped them well. They didn't start out with, we're going to change our customer experience. It's like, we're going to roll out a specific chatbot and get containment of this type of support call down by 90%. Sure, we're going to give LLMs, but we're going to customize it on our data so that we can have a task-specific LLM for these financial services advisors, right? So you can see use cases. We've talked a lot about coding. We see big numbers in coding, 30, 40% improvement in software development. Okay, the reality, I'm talking to customers, they're seeing 10, 15, maybe 20. Huge win still, right? Not a problem. So you basically have to take care of the things we were talking about earlier, getting your data house in order, being able to have metrics, monitor them, observe them, picking the right use cases, all things I think are basic business principles, but they go off the rails really fast if you just apply the speed and strength of AI to them.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you described the almost the full stack has to be reevaluated. Yeah, and I've been saying this for a while. I actually just did a podcast on this, basically talking about infrastructure. That one of the steps in your AI journey is a strategic pause and a rethinking of your infrastructure strategy. And the reason for that is that every enterprise in the world's infrastructure strategy was probably set 5 to 7 years ago. 5 to 7 years ago, generative AI didn't even exist. Today, it's becoming the dominant workload on your system. It uses a different class of data, it has a different kind of compute, it has a different user experience. Everything is different about it. It doesn't mean your infrastructure is wrong. It just means you ought to pause and kind of figure out if it's still right or if you have to change it. But what you were describing, I've made the case for a long time that prioritization matters. Fewer projects targeting a bigger impact, and I still stand by that. But the other reason why fewer projects matter is to go and work the entire stack and make sure it's going to work and get it right. You need a pipe cleaner. Jeffrey Moore wrote a book a long time ago that talked about the bowling alley scenario that, if you throw a bowling ball and you aim at all 10 pins, you're likely going to do terrible. But if you aim at the first pin and you get that one right, it might knock the other ones down. And so in this case, you're talking about full stack reevaluation. You're thinking about your data architecture differently. How do you modernize your data and where do you modernize it first for AI? You're talking about your governance structures, your security architectures, and even the hybrid infrastructure you have. Hybrid infrastructure is choice. Where do you run these things? Where does this application run better? Where should it run? And trying to work through that simultaneously across, 1,000 applications seems like a really hard problem. Trying to solve it for the first three big ones probably is a lot more manageable. So it's just another reason why, narrow scope, lead projects, ones that have an impact, but also ones that you can work through this stack and kind of figure these things out before you go to scale.
Absolutely, 100%. And, there's been, I think the good news about AI is we'd finally worked through all of the, is it public, is it private, is it hybrid, and the cloud side. So we now know that it's going to be hybrid and distributed. That still has its challenges, but at least we don't have that discussion. We're starting with that. The thing that has been a real bane of everybody's existence in the past, call it several months, we have been talking about agentic AI for probably a year and a half now. And now organizations are getting the push that this is the next big thing. And back on the earlier point, they're still struggling with generative, right? So moving from generative to agentic is a real struggle right now. But I think we've still got some real issues with agentic that have yet to be addressed before we can even think of getting into that. And one of them, people ask me, what's my advice? I'm like, well, when you talk to technology vendors now about agentic strategy, I want to know what their identity and security stack is for that, because that's super important.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny. At the beginning of this year, shifting to agentic, as the chief AI officer of Dell, I went and did the rounds with all of my software partners, the ISVs that I use, and every one of them pitched agents to me.
Sure.
And I said, "Oh, great! Yeah, I'm a big believer in this. We built autonomous agents last year. We feel like this is a really important next step." And then I asked them a simple question: "Okay, well, how does your agent talk to this other company's agent that's also in my ecosystem? How do they talk to me? Do you have an interworking protocol? How do I secure that?" Crickets, nothing. And so we tried to solve that problem by dragging them all into a joint meeting in February, I think it was, or end of January. And I sat them all in a room together and said, "Look, I'm the customer. If you guys can't talk to each other securely, I can't use you because my services workflow go between you and you and you and me. And if I can't enumerate that in a trustworthy way with a collection of agents that can talk to each other, I can't go after that problem because I'm not going to just use any one of you. Silos are not my friend in this scenario." And it's actually turned into a pretty good exercise that we've been working through kind of the de facto and trying to figure it out. But even with all that good work, which I think we've rationalized 8A and MCP and other things, I have work to do. I have a lot of pressure to apply real autonomous agents to real problems. I have a whole class of work that I can't solve with a chatbot. Any multi-organization complex process is not solvable with a single AI tool. Agents are the tool to solve that. I'd like to go solve those. And so, funny enough, last week we published internally our first agentic standards and guidelines for the company and our partners. We basically set the rules down. And you're absolutely right. The things we went after were, we're going to have a Dell identity on every agent working on our behalf, even if it's done by a third party. We're going to register every agent in the CMDB as an asset. We're going to force everybody to use Hotel. We're going to use 8A this way and MCP this way. And it was interesting because I feel like that's a fail. I should not have to do that. As the customer, somebody should have laid this out by now, but we haven't gotten there. And I think some of it, well, actually, I'll ask you, why are we not there? You know the security industry pretty well. What is our structural defect that prevents us from having a clear, coherent, architecture for something as basic as how do you introduce trust into an agent?
Well, okay. I think in a way we have to step back. So the first thing is every single software company or vendors coming up with an agent for their thing, right? So if we look through how the narrative went, first it was generative AI, then it was like, we're going to create an agent to do something. And then somebody said, oh, we're going to have multiple agents. So those agents have to talk to each other. And this is how we got to the A to A and MCP. And there's like, well, if multiple agents are going to talk to each other, we probably need some kind of framework for them to understand how they do what when. Okay, we had an orchestration layer. So I feel like we're working our way through the stack to, oh, and now they're all going to need an identity and some kind of roles-based access for us to know, who is the agent, what can the agent do realistically, like how big or small is that? When would they talk to a human? Like, when does it fall out of agentic and go back to people? So all of those are things I think people are working through, particularly, and sometimes I think that they're like, well, you're going to create your own agent. We've created that for our agent. It's like, well, that's great. You've created it for your agent in your SaaS app, right? Well, SaaS app A and SaaS app B are not going to have that same discussion, right? So I think we're just now getting to, what does identity look like? It doesn't look like the identity that John or Maribel had. It can't. It's got some other things. It's also not as permissioned, right? Because there are going to be agents that can do very specific things, and that's all they can do, right? And then there's the concept of the super agent that has access to do more, right? And that's a little more like a human. So I think where we are is just trying to figure out perhaps what an agent even is, so that we can then define how to ID it and how to secure it. And not a very satisfying answer, but I really do feel like we're moving so fast as an industry that we're just knocking down one problem at a time. But what we haven't gotten to is, if you don't have the answer to that question of understanding what that agent is and what it can do, you can't really use it. You can't just go have agents off running willy-nilly doing autonomous actions And so therefore, when vendors get pushback on agentic AI, they don't understand why. And it's because it's not just that people don't want automation, it's that they don't feel they have enough visibility and control to allow the automation to happen. And that's where we are.
No, I think you're, on the upside, even though I've had to define it myself, I didn't invent anything. The tools I'm using all exist. I mean, ADA and MCP are the newest pieces, but the security protocols I'll likely use are the established ones. I'll have to use them in a novel way. I have to do a little bit of tweaking to the tools I use and the providers I have, but that's a good news story, because if we had to like invent an entirely new set of protocols to solve for agentic interworking and identity management, that would be a very long journey. And on the other hand, the fact that the ones we had to invent, ADA and MCP, happened very quickly, and the other protocols largely fit in, means it's annoying that I have to make that decision of defining it myself, but I'm doing it for exactly the reason you described. I, I tell people we've had tremendous progress in Dell, huge material impact to the company. I didn't use a single agent for any of it. I have 12 POCs running right now of real autonomous agents around next generation processes that I want to basically bring into the AI world. And, they're kind of upside. I've done well without it. I feel like I could do a lot more with it. So I have a bit of time. But I'm with you. I think that the idea that I would use an agent, even a single isolated agent, doing autonomous work without me being able to authenticate it, authorize it, and understand it, that is a non-starter in my world. And I think, to be candid, every enterprise in the world, every government in the world ought to really take that and think about it. What are the rules that will allow you to impart trust on these kind of autonomous AI systems? And if you're not clear about it, the default behavior should be, well, hold off a little bit. The good news is we'll get there. Funny enough, by holding off, we'll probably accelerate the industry to do the right thing. But it'll come together correctly. We've been through this before, and we'll get through this one. But the hype cycle, the hype cycle tells us that there are a lot of people rushing just to deploy agents without working through these issues. And maybe as a last word, what is your advice to someone who is deciding to implement N number of agents because they think that's a good target without actually having thought through these? What would you tell them?
Yeah, so I actually literally had this happen last week, and you need N number of agents by the end of December. And it's like, well, the first thing we have to go through is what is the risk associated with that? If it has specific company data, if it has specific customer data. Usually the minute that you bring out the risk profile, people start to rethink if that's a good idea. The second one is really trying to understand these are goal-oriented systems when you move into agentic. It's not like a chatbot where it's a query and you get back an answer, right? So you really have to be clear on what type of goal you're trying to achieve. And because goals go through multiple steps with probably different software applications, you can't necessarily achieve that goal until you fix this identity and security issue, right? So once you start to lay that out to people, they realize, because I think part of the issue is they don't understand the difference, but they think agentic's just a smarter chatbot, right? They don't understand that agentic, it's like, let's talk about onboarding an employee. You've got an example, you're onboarding an employee. There's going to be a kickoff for calendar invites. There's going to be a kickoff to order a laptop. That, by the way, is a dollar issue, right? That has some, procurement associated with that. There is a kickoff to set off an email account, set up an ID, right? There's a lot to the goal of onboarding an employee. And when you look at it that way, you go, oh, this is a fundamentally different thing. It's not just me saying, hey, I'm gonna automate one thing within a chatbot. Like I'm gonna automate the request to get a credit card verification in a telecom service provider example, right? So you can do that. You can do it within a system that you've already permissioned and secured and what have you. But once you start crossing systems that have different ways of communicating with each other, you have to be much more thoughtful. And you also have to know what they're doing so you can turn it off. What tools they're using,
Yeah. So your advice is it doesn't make a lot of sense to let an anonymous stranger hire your employees,
right?
or
Right.
spend your money, or any number of things. So no, I think you're absolutely spot on, Maribel. Thanks very much for joining. By the way, the hilarious thing about this is like the conversations you and I have been having with people in the last like 2 weeks. And I don't know what the next 2 weeks will bring, but it'll be more of these fun conversations as we go on this AI journey. So again, thanks for reciprocating and joining this AI Insights with John Roese. Glad to have you here. Looking forward to lots more conversations.
Thanks, John.